I'd like to paint a picture for you in your mind's eye, in your imagination, what is taking place now around the world. It's almost like times when FDR used to have his fireside chats. Thus far, we don't have streaming video, but only streaming audio. And so, around America and around the world, disciples of the Ascended Masters are huddled around their personal computers the way the people in America during the 1940s were huddled around their radios, listening to the voice of the president, holding those fireside chats to keep up their hope and their spirits during some very scary times for America and for the world, for that matter. So, we have a synchronicity that's going on. Although there is no longer an Iron Curtain as it was once known, there are people in Eastern Europe and even in Mother Russia, in England, that have stayed up into the middle of the night or gotten up early in the morning so that they could be participating in real time to this wonderful, wonderful celebration of the birth of the Christ child that we celebrate not only in honor of beloved Jesus, but in honor of the Christ child within each and every one of you. So, on behalf of Carolyn and myself, on behalf of beloved Moria, of beloved Saint Germain, of beloved Mother Mary, of Jesus, of course, of Lanello, of Godfrey, and so many of the other fathers and mothers who make up the hosts of the Ascended Masters, we'd like to welcome you to our home away from home, here at 8,500 feet in the White Mountains, where we are gathered around a fire to have a chat with all of you, to welcome the Ascended Masters into this event, for they are indeed invisibly visible here. We trust that they have worked their God magic at inner levels, so that not only are you connected through the sound of your ears, through the sound of our voice to your ears, but perhaps more importantly by the thread of light and sound that travels as a golden pink ray of glowing light established by the Masters that is like threading a needle. In this case, the eye of the needle is the heart flames of every one of you who are listening and participating around the world, as well as the heart flames of all of you who are here present. And indeed, space, distance have no power to separate our hearts, not only in this earth world, but no power to separate us from the heart of God, the very white fire core of the heart of God. I don't mind sharing with all of you that, as a saying that beloved Saint Germain used to love to say, coming events cast their shadows before them, that in the akasha of the future, there are trembling on the lip of the cup of potential, many magnificent expansions of the work of the Ascended Masters, of the outreach of the Brotherhood's strivings into the world of mankind, into the imaginations of the minds of men, and into their hearts. There's a great portent of many wonderful, wonderful things to come. And so, while we may not talk about a lot of the specifics of those tonight, we want you to share in that rejoicing. Our Temple of the Presence, we have often likened to a little child that was very robust and healthy and lusty with its infant's cry, that still needed the mother's love and the protection of the father. It still needed a lot of tender care. But that infant child is beginning to stretch its limbs more and more. And we are very grateful, and the Brotherhood is very optimistic and holding a great deal of hope for their ability to reach through the veil, through the agency of the temple, as it grows stronger and more capable of being the fulcrum of the lever of the light of the ascended masters into the world. We give gratitude and credit to the heart of God for all of those wonderful things to come. But we also acknowledge, as do the Brotherhood, as does El Moria, as does Saint Germain, acknowledge your role in the good that is to come. You have kept the flame ablaze upon the altar of your own heart flame. You have raised your voices in song, in decree, and in fiat. You have kept the faith through many a dark night, many a time of doubt and fear. You have held fast to that which you have received. You have raised the torch of your own heart flame on high. You've given voice to that torch of your heart through your decrees, through your violet flame vigils, through the emerald matrix decrees, and all of that pressure of the accumulation of your momentum has been taken up by the ascended masters, multiplied many-fold over, and is now beginning its grand return cycle back into manifestation and into fulfillment. This is not an excuse to begin allowing your momentum to flag or to falter. It is a time to step up even more the power of your decrees, the power of your mind's eye, the eye of God within you, which is able to visualize and imagine all of the God good that is intended. To that end, El Moria has sent you his love in his annual Christmas letter, which is a personal message from his heart to yours. I encourage all of you to savor his release as you would, although we're all teetotalers here, if you were to have a vintage champagne from one of the French brothers where they used to invent champagne. If you had a very rare vintage, you would wait until a special occasion. So when you receive Moria's letter, don't read it on the bus. Don't read it while you're listening with one ear to the weather report for the day. Wait until all of the confusion and the din and the activity of the day has gone by and you can find quiet and an undisturbed time to have a visitation with the Lord of the First Ray, where it can be just you and he sitting down. If you will prepare that environment, then when you open his letter and read it, you will find your heart flooded with his largesse of heart and his vision for you, what he as a great father figure in your life holds for your future. He has also instructed us as messengers to reissue something that most of you who are torchbearers of the temple should have received when you first joined the torchbearers, and that is our visualization book full of the guided meditations and visualizations of that which we are working on together. This is both in printed form as well as the spoken guided visualization by our beloved messenger Carolyn, who will enable you to, once you have read it and studied it and mastered the words, you can put down the book, close your eyes, and follow along as she delivers the Master's radiation through that visualization as well. So both of these will be coming to you as Moria's personal gift this Christmas season. They will go a long way in bringing all of this potential God good into manifestation. I have to tell you, before we go on with our message for the evening, that there has been a certain lull in the outer thrust into the world on the part of the Brotherhood for reasons that we choose not to go into this evening, for a matter of decades, many decades. And we are now poised to have builded the foundation at Coeur de Leon, the heart of the lion, El Moria's home, which is our heart center. Those facilities that will enable a great expansion and thrust of the Brotherhood's work of bringing in the dawn and golden age of Saint Germain out into the world. And for that there is great rejoicing, and you are invited to share and enter into that rejoicing as well. I might say that many decades ago, when I was myself young in years to this work, young in this embodiment, I had the good fortune of working with beloved Lanello when he was still an embodiment, Mark Prophet, and spending a number of Christmas Eve celebrations at La Tourelle in Colorado Springs. And I recall the great joy of life, joie de vivre, that he expressed. He would get together the group of accordion players, 1, 2, sometimes 3 accordion players, and we would have a rollicking good time at the Heart Center there, in kind of an impromptu celebration just around the Christmas season. It won't be too long till we celebrate Lanello's natal day in his final embodiment, which happens to be on Christmas Eve. It is a most wonderful ritual and a holy day for us to welcome him into our home on Christmas Eve, as we do each and every year. And we'd like to encourage all of you who are listening to tune in on Christmas Eve. We try to make both the Christmas Eve service as well as the Christmas Day dictation by Beloved Jesus. We try to limit the length of those entire services so that families can have an interlude of time in which to welcome the Masters into their lives and still have ample time to share in the usual family traditions of Christmas time. But I assure you that there is no greater family than the family of God, and to have El Moria, to have Lanello as an uncle, an elder brother who comes in with a great joy in his heart. He ought to be welcomed as an honorary member of everyone's personal family. I promise you that you'll never regret making room for him in your life Christmas Eve any more than making room for beloved Jesus on Christmas Day. I know that tonight is supposed to be a fireside chat, and we will get around to that, but I'd like to invite Carolyn to get a word in edgewise here before I go on with a few more remarks that I'd like to share with you this evening. We have a vast cross-section of humanity that is represented in the Ascended Master teachings, not only of races and cultures, but even of ages, from the very young to the very old. I think many times those who are of younger age, many of the younger people are caught up in the social aspects of what's going on, kind of awakening to adulthood, awakening to the world around them. You've gone through all kinds of levels of awakening. And even students who have been in the teachings for a long time, they've had a spurt of inspiration, sometimes a honeymoon grace period early on when they first found the teachings, where the Brotherhood's light buoyed them up and carried them along. And then there may come a time when someone is obliged to stand in their own expression of the light. And if they have externalized that light from their heart, they're fortunate. If they haven't, they may begin to wonder why they are on this path. This is not an unusual occurrence. I'd like to share with you a little episode from the life of one of the world teachers, beloved Kuthumi. Something that happened to him when he was probably 18 or 19 years of age, when he was embodied around, I guess maybe 1300 AD, I'm not quite sure when, in Italy. He came into that embodiment with his name Francis. And he was a young rake. You know, he came from the upper middle class and had a whole entourage of an in-crowd of his own back then. They dressed well, they partied well. They even went on campaign together and jousted and wore their suits of armor and played at war and had a gay old time. And frankly, even then, Francis was the life of the party. It was his light that everyone gravitated to, and all of his friends just were swept up in the wonderful aura of something was happening wherever Francis was. Then one day on horseback, coming back from one of these play wars, these play campaigns that the little fiefdoms of medieval Italy had, there was a life-changing event that happened to Francis. In one flash, his vision was opened, and he beheld standing there in the atmosphere the resurrected and ascended Jesus. And he was smitten with a vision and an understanding of a greater life that lay beyond the best of what this world had to offer. And in that moment, he saw something and experienced something. He realized what God had wrought. He realized that this God-man that was standing before him had been literally fashioned and wrought in the crucible of life's experiences. And he saw a higher expression of life than he could observe anywhere in the outer world. And in that experience, Jesus imparted to Francis, this young teenager, imparted to him a pain in his side, a pain in his life, because he let it be known to Francis that what Francis thought he saw in Jesus that was so beyond Francis' abilities to attain to was Francis' destiny. That this was, in fact, the divine plan that God had for every one of the millions of his children on the earth. That this was what they were heir to, and they were intended to become. You know, the Ascended Masters, from time to time, find it important to actually veil their glory and take on mortal form. And they do, from time to time, actually walk the earth, unrecognized for who they are by the people that bump shoulders with them and jostle them on the sidewalks. They come in that manner to anchor light for certain reasons, but they are not recognized. Even Ascended Master students wouldn't recognize them when they withhold their auras, when they withhold this glory of the light. But I tell you that were beloved El Moria or beloved Kuthumi, any one of these ascended masters, to actually stand here in our midst tonight and withdraw the restraints upon their light and let you see for maybe 20 seconds only the full unmitigated splendor and magnificence and grandeur of just one ascended master, those 20 seconds would ruin you for this world, for the rest of this life, because you would have the contrast of realizing what life can be and become in comparison to this prosaic outer life, no matter how good it might be by worldly standards. And you would see in a flash of intuition and illumination and understand why you're here and what life is all about. And if you're a young person, you'd wonder what all the hoopla is about decrees, about going to conferences and doing all of these things, because it's really not just about balancing your karma so bad things won't happen to you. And it's not about praying so that good things will happen to you, that you'll get the right relationship or the right wealth or any of those things of this world. You'll understand that there's a master plan at work for you, and you will realize that, as impossible as it may seem, the truth is that you're destined for the same greatness that you see in the ascended masters. And what appears to be an absolute impossibility, an impassable gulf between you and they, will be tempered by the realization that this is the destiny that El Moria is always talking about, that each one is intended for. This is the destiny of every life stream upon the planet. It's quite a challenge for the Ascended Masters to keep this in the forefront of people's attention and consciousness, because there is so much to distract us, to demand our life and our attention. So many other things of karma and of allurement that seem to take the way. But once you had that kind of drawing aside of the veil, I tell you, you'd never be the same again. If you were ever to behold such a one as beloved Sanat Kumara, it would be like, as we've talked about from time to time, going to the foot of the sheer monolith of granite that is Yosemite of El Capitan, and looking up into the cloud-shrouded heights, looking straight up that vertical shaft and feeling very small and insignificant in comparison. That's how you might feel in the vastness of such a being as beloved Sanat Kumara. But what you have to have, rather, is what Moria and Linello have coined as the word co-measurement, to understand that that which you have seen is that which you are destined to express and to externalize. And this whole great vast drama of planet Earth and all of her evolutions, however long and tedious it may seem to take by human standards of time, it's all worth it when you find the end product of polishing the gemstone of even just one ascended master, much less an entire life wave of ascended masters ascending from the hillsides. It's very interesting the psyche of human beings, to create a separation between that which they behold. It's not astonishing to see how, when the ascended masters have appeared in past ages, they have been deified to the point of idolatry. They have been the gods and goddesses of antiquity. They have been the other species outside of human evolution that's separated by an impassable gulf. It's interesting how human nature is like that. We have all kinds of vestiges of that in our human cultures. Class consciousness is an expression of that, where you're born into a certain class, or in the East, perhaps into a caste, as they have in the Hindu tradition. And whatever you're born into, for good or for ill, that's it. That's all you can aspire to, is what you have been born into by your blood. How much more then is the sense of separation between human beings and the deity? Human beings and, for example, in the West, the classical gods and goddesses of the ascended masters, who are worshipped in an idolatrous sense rather than welcomed, loved, and honored and communed with as elder brothers and sisters. This relates very directly to the message of Christmas, by the way, all of this, because the whole thrust of what Christmas was about was where these two apparently divergent, non-intersecting evolutions come together and become one and the same. It is where God is born in flesh. And the good news of that is that this little infant birth, this little lamb of the infant Christ, doesn't stay a perpetual infant like a little tiny Cupid that remains in that infancy, but rather, over time, grows into maturity, adulthood, mastery, and self-attainment. So that is the message of Christmas. The good news is that human beings are not merely Homo sapiens. We don't trace ourselves back to Australopithecus or the Neanderthal or any of the other primates that were found in the African continent of millions of years ago. We trace our descent from the star shining in the night, the star of the electronic body. That is our birthplace. That is our history, our lineage, if you will. That is the blood of our blood that we are from. And the good news is that it isn't any longer a class consciousness where just the few are in this privileged, higher caste of ascended masters, gods, and goddesses, and everybody else is the plebeian caste, the plebeian class that is there to be servitors, to bow and scrape and to worship and to idolatrize. The whole message of the teachings of the ascended masters is that the same quality of worth is already alive and well and breathing on the altar of your heart. It is a Christ flame. It is there, and depending on whether it's a little spark, like a spark that comes off the logs, depending on whether your heart flame, if it's a little spark that's hardly awake, then you would call that a little lamb. I don't know about lambs when they're first born, but I do remember puppies and kittens. When they're first born, there's that certain time for a few days, 3 or 4 or 5 days, when their eyes don't even open up yet. They've been born, they're in the world, but they're still kind of helpless, lovable little creatures with their eyes closed. Then eventually the eyes open and they start looking out into the world. So for many, their externalization of their heart flame, which is the expression of their Christhood, is like that little lamb, pure as new-driven snow, innocent, newborn, but not yet able to have its legs under it and able to move about. But it's not going to stay a little lamb. It's going to eventually be the adult, mature symbol of the Christ, which is the ram, the great symbol of the fleece that Jason went after, the symbol of the adult Christ expression. And that is for every single one of you. If you finally begin to open your eyes of your Holy Christ self in this world and look out through those eyes and behold, ECCE DEUS, behold the God-realized man, and to realize that what you're about is really what your mighty I Am presence is doing in this world. This world is like a blacksmith's shop. It's got its furnace and its crucible and its anvil and its hammer. And the Holy Christ self is there, and you and I, we're the iron and steel. And life's experiences are putting us into the coals of the fire, and our Holy Christ self is creating a wrought character that is a reflection of this vision of the ascended Master, which is already entirely complete and perfect in the mighty I Am presence. What the Holy Christ self is doing, like the village smithy, is hammering and putting into the fire and then into the water and then back into the crucible and creating a self in this world that is a reflection of the identity of the God presence. Because there's a very unique thing about this process of what God is doing. What is God doing? Making more images of God. That's what God is doing. And the interesting thing about every one of those images, and the interesting thing about that God presence, is that it is self-made. It is not passive, nor has it been made by some other part of life. So the compulsion of embodiment is that we, each one of us, we have got to forge this by our own free will and by the indwelling God presence working through us to make that identity. It is not a case of stamping out gingerbread ascended masters or stamping out little gingerbread angels with wings. Nothing is going to be passive about this process of forging your attainment. And it isn't going to be something that I can do for any one of you, nor you for anyone else. Everyone has to do this for themselves because that, by definition, is the nature of the individualization of the Godhead. Every ascended master is self-made. They are what they are because they have used that thread of light that comes from the great central sun. They've drawn upon it for eons of time, and they've pulled it through their heart flame and externalized it. Fortunately, every one of us has a blueprint of that identity. Every line of character, every attribute, it's all there perfected in the electronic body. And that is the absolute good news of the Christmas season, because it doesn't really matter what the outer form may appear like right now. What matters is the etchings of the mind of God that has etched this pattern of perfection. And I promise you that every single person here tonight and listening, if your Holy Christ self were to really hand you the portrait of your own ascended presence, and you were to gaze upon that which will one day be, you would probably shake your heads in disbelief and astonishment to consider that that would ever be who you are and who you might be. But that is what your destiny holds for you. And that is the absolute good news of the Ascended Masters. Once you realize this, you won't chafe so much over the times when your Holy Christ self puts you back into the crucible to melt off a little bit of the dross and to skim off a little bit more of the gold to the surface, or puts you on the anvil and starts pounding away to hammer out more of the facets of the God identity. This is the great work that the Brotherhood is engaged in at inner levels. This is the great work of the Ascended Master activities, to point to an entirely higher way of life, an entirely higher sense of selfhood than our civilization. There are people who are born, live an entire life, and die, and never once for even 30 seconds in the span of an entire lifetime does this possibility ever come across the screen of their minds, that it could be so. They never even dream that this is the way life really is or what the future holds for them. So that is the labor that is before all of us. That is what the Ascended Masters have set before us, is to etch into the culture, the modern culture, what it means to aspire to a higher sense of self and a higher sense of destiny. I think that all of this is coming together tonight because the Temple of the Presence, as the instrument of the Ascended Masters, is poised on the cusp of a renewed thrust out into the world. Some of the rooms and buildings that we have on the drawing boards for Coeur de Leon, of course, chief amongst them, Fleur de Lis Chapelle, are intended to be places where not only do we have this little streaming audio that's going out tonight, but thanks to the miracles of modern technology, there will be the video and the audio that will be able to reach out across the horizon of the earth and reach into people's homes and places of worship and proclaim this message and begin to hitch up people's imaginations to this great star. That's what the words of that song were all about, by the way, if you want to go back and meditate on it. This new, brand new shaft of an idea coming through the ethers of the Christ light coming into the manger of the heart flame, igniting that heart flame and elevating the self into this entirely new and higher range of identity. I have mentioned this on a few occasions. It bears repeating this evening. There have been wonderful opportunities for Carolyn and I to entertain our Lord Mahachohan as he has delivered the Ruby Chalice visitations on the God qualities. And as I've shared with you before, there was this one certain occasion when he concluded the Ruby Chalice visitation. And I was reaching over and getting ready to turn off the tape when he launched into a separate address to Carolyn and I. And the theme of his subject was eternity and of the fact that the Ascended Masters had eternity on their side. and that they were like these great elder shepherds of the race. And they could and would abide in the patience and the vision that they had of the faces of the mighty I Am Presence and the Holy Christ selves of the races of mankind. And they would stand and abide, knowing that the time would come when at long last, not just isolated individuals here and there, not just maybe a mere one person per year would ascend from the planet, but when at long last, more and more of humanity would begin to get the idea of why they were finding themselves awakening in this earth and what all of this great drama of life was all about. And that they, the Ascended Masters, would win in the end. I'd like to share with you, in conclusion, just a few of the meditations of a wonderful Son of God who lived in England, a contemporary of Helena Petrovna Blavatsky and Annie Besant. He did not move in their circles, but I can tell you that he was most assuredly overshadowed by beloved Saint Germain as well as El Morya. He became the poet laureate of England for the time. Alfred Lord Tennyson was his name. He was a wonderful mystic. When we've got time for a little bit more humor, I'll share with you a few of the lines of a few of his poems, which I can certainly identify with, and I know Carolyn will as well. I mention him because even though he was a product of his age, in many ways he shared in this work of the Great White Brotherhood to elevate the race of mankind to a higher state of being. He lived in a time that was a very tumultuous time for people of religion. It might seem really strange to us to think that 150 years ago, 160 years ago, people took the Bible so literally that they actually had backtracked based on scripture and verse and decided that the earth had been created by God literally in 6 days, roughly 5,500 years ago, give or take a few years. And that was pretty well accepted throughout not just a few, but the many. Most people in Christendom believe that way. There are still remnants of that today, especially in the Deep South here in the United States. They call it creationism. The reason I'm bringing it up in the case of Tennyson is because there was a lot of swirling of controversy at his time when Darwin came back from his famous voyage and set forth the ideas of millions of years of evolution bringing about the current species of animal and plant life that we have on the planet. At the same time, you had other scientists who were geologists who pointed to the warping and twists in the mountain ranges and the places where the rivers had cut through. And they were saying, hey, look what's right in front of you. These processes, many of them took many millions of years to produce. And what does this say about Holy Scripture, which is supposed to be dictated word for word by the mouth of God, which traces back only 5,000 years? So Tennyson, who was not necessarily so much a church-going person, but certainly a mystic and a believer in his own right, was aware of many of these controversies going on in his own time. And he found his own resolution to the conflict between those two views and was able to resolve them to his own satisfaction. Part of what he resolved, the way that he found that this was true, because he did have this overshadowing by the masters, he realized that there was a greater destiny that was heir to mankind. And he realized that the working out of this ultimate goal was going to take a lot longer than merely being born and dying roughly anywhere from 40 to 80 to 100 years later. That the great work of creation was ongoing, and that man was the acme, humanity were the acme of that creation, and he took comfort in the fact that this work was not yet finished. It wasn't completed on the sixth day of creation and God resting on the seventh, but that it was ongoing. So let me share with you just a few of the lines by Tennyson. He wrote a poem entitled Dawn, and he was arguing that if the whole life cycle of the human race began at dawn and ended at sunset, that this was the moment of the dawn and not of noontide of the day. So the theme here is the dawn, not day. Here's how you put it. It is shame, so few should have climbed from the dens in the level below. Men with a heart and a soul, no slaves of a four-footed will. But if 20 millions of summers are stored yet in the sunlight still, we are far from the noon of man. There is time for the race to grow. Red of the dawn, it is turning a fainter red. So be it. But when shall we lay the ghost of the brute that is walking and haunting us yet, and be free? In 100, in 1,000 winters? Ah, what will our children be? The men of 100,000 million summers yet to come. Where is one that born of woman altogether can escape from the lower world within? The moods of the tiger or of the ape. Man as yet is being made, and ere the crowning age of ages, shall not eon after eon pass and touch him into shape? All about him shadows still, but while the races flower and fade, prophet eyes may catch a gleam, a glory slowly gaining on the shade, till the peoples are all one, and all their voices blend in chorus. Hallelujah to the Maker. It is finished. Man is made. So he was looking to this time when humanity is no longer of the Homo sapien race, but of the race of the gods. So I would encourage all of you to welcome not only beloved Jesus, but all of the ascended masters in this time of the year. And whatever you do, guard well against the human characteristic of class consciousness that would elevate the ascended masters in an idolatrous way into a different evolution than your own, to make them far away gods and goddesses resting on some remote Olympus to be propitiated and worshipped. This is one of the tragedies of our Western culture and Western civilization, that we have made it a sacrilege to make oneself part of the divine family. It is one of the grievous cardinal sins to ever equate oneself with the deity or the family of God, and to put Jesus in a different class than everyone else. But it's not unique just to Christianity. The old world religion did it just as well. If we had time, we'd go into all of that. So your job is to realize that there's a lot more inside of you than you yourself have ever dreamt of. You're the one who needs to pinch yourself, to awaken and to look at this grand glory that you are in your God presence, to realize that the Christmas angels are celebrating the birth of your own Holy Christ self in the heart flame of your Christ flame, that it makes it a holy night, that the Ascended Masters come with their gifts to you. Moria, Katumi, Dwalkul, symbolic of the entire brotherhood, bring their gifts for your mission that you will need along the way. They bring those gifts as momentums of their own attainment that you may draw upon to overcome. If once you capture this glimpse of what has been decreed for so very long, you'll give yourself permission to be a part of that great communion and company of the Ascended Masters. And that will make their job so very much easier as you realize what you're all about. May I say that the labor of that can be facilitated by helping the Ascended Masters in their great work. That's one of the best ways of growing out of the old self and into the higher self that you want to be. You'll find joys in that service. You'll find challenges. You'll find that the old icons of your pet identity traits that you wanted to keep, that don't fit into the image of your Christ self, that just the rough and tumble process of world service will polish those rough edges. It can't be any other way. You'll find that where you may have carefully set up a very carefully guarded and orchestrated life for yourself so that none of your identity is disturbed, your pet parts of yourself, you'll find that if you are brave enough to engage in world service, your path will be 10 times more swift than otherwise would be the case. So I want to thank you for giving us your attention tonight. I want to thank you for being a part of this moment when heaven and earth do indeed come together, when the brotherhood is an unseen company that is a part of our fellowship here and a part of the great wave, the oncoming wave of their world service.